Afternoon, everybody. We'll now call this committee of the whole meeting Wednesday, June the 5th, 2024 to order at 4 p.m. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded ancestral territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples and the Splatsin on the Secwepemc Nation. Looking for an adoption of the agenda. There is one change, that the June 5th, 2024 agenda for the committee of the whole meeting be adopted as amended by adding item 3.2, zoning bylaw review. Have a mover? Councillor Todd, seconded Councillor Wayner. Thank you. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And with that, we will jump right into new business. Going down to our Kerry project, I believe we have Jeff Brackett and Christine Haylock with us. Is that correct? From McElhaney and Lori. Thank you. I'll hand it over to you.
All right. So thank you everyone for coming out today. We are, I guess, going to have a bit of a working session here with members of council and kind of take a walk through some of the projects. So Lori is here with us. We'll get into the introduction in a second. So we've got a brief agenda here. We'll do some welcome introductions, project review, get a good discussion going with council. So that's a good chunk of the time there I think will be spent in that discussion. And then a bit of a talk about what the next steps are once we have that discussion. Next slide, please. So we have with us today Lori Cordell with City of Armstrong. Myself, I'm Jeff Brackett. I'm a civil engineer, so I work on the roads, sidewalks, utilities. And with me here is...
I'm Christine Haylock, and I'm a landscape architect, and I have been working on the urban design part of it and supporting Jeff.
Yeah, so there's a number of different aspects here to the project. Community engagement, we've done a good amount of that already, the first and second phases. Urban design, wayfinding, landscape design, and civil engineering design are all factored into the Kerry project. Slide, please. So this will just be a review of kind of where we are, what the background is on the project. So we're seeing the Kerry project being to reimagine the main corridor from Smith Drive along Pleasant Valley Road and Boulevard to the new City Hall. So sort of the downtown area spanning between the highway and City Hall. The goal for this project is to increase gathering spaces, improve the infrastructure, attract and retain businesses, include, connect and welcome residents, visitors, improve wayfinding accessibility. So that's kind of the overall plan. Now, the last time this area was revitalized was 1988. So my family remembers when it was all fresh and new, but there have definitely been some evolving priorities in the region. So we're looking at ways to factor in the active transportation plan. We're looking at ways to incorporate findings from the traffic safety plan and bring those into any kind of update for the downtown to make sure we're including those. So those will help guide the development of this project. Also, Armstrong has aging infrastructure. So when we're doing this work, if we're looking at upgrading a road, there's going to be a component where we say, if we're upgrading this road, are there any sewers or utilities that need to be upgraded as well too, so that we can kind of roll in capital planning into the overall Kerry project as we move forward. A bit of background on the active transportation plan. So the active transportation plan that's been passed by council was finalized in May 2023. Watt Consulting had done the work for that. And I thought it was important to include the vision statement and goals, just to reiterate what we're hoping to achieve on the active transportation plan. So the network will empower residents and visitors of all ages, abilities to move seamlessly and safely within the community. Active transportation facilities connect to public transit and offer protection for motor vehicles where possible to make walking, rolling, and wheeling the preferred choice for trips to local and community destinations. Armstrong is a leader in active mode share in the region and supports and integrates regional active transportation initiatives and connections. So a connection like that to the rail trail network could be one of those connections. And at the bottom there is kind of a snip of one of the possible configurations that was put forward in the active transportation plan. There are others, but this is one that we see kind of represented in some of our current concepts. where there is road traffic, parallel parking, and a shared multi-use pathway that can accommodate both pedestrians and cyclists. Next one, please. The road safety study, it was also from 2023, so quite recent, again with Watt Consulting Group. There's a number of areas that are covered by this. It talks about Armstrong as a whole, but there are a number of areas that are within the Kerry study area, including, for example, the intersection of Pleasant Valley Road and Mill, as shown on the screen there, where there are safety improvements to kind of rectify some of the challenges at that intersection. The intersection of Pleasant Valley Boulevard and Okanagan would be another opportunity where there's some challenges with that kind of long intersection. So in this report, there was also content in there that's talking about things like removing angled parking stalls and eliminating rear end collisions. So when we're approaching the Kerry project, we are factoring in not just the active transportation plan, but aspects of the traffic safety report that was already reviewed and incorporated with City of Armstrong. Project objectives. There's a lot here. I don't know that I'll sort of read through all of these, but the objectives are a lot of things. We're talking about building on these existing studies. We're talking about how we can wrap in capital planning. So we know that there's streets that are in rough condition and we want to try and have those as early priorities for the project. We're looking at how we can integrate the active transportation plan to make those connections to other communities or to other areas of the community. Wayfinding, so helping people find their way around. Looking at how we can implement the community vision and revitalize that downtown, get people shopping, bring them into the local businesses. Finding those landscape upgrades, finding ways to do all this and make sure it's the right size for Armstrong. So it's going to be something that can be accommodated within the budget. It's going to be something that fits with the character of the community. And in that, we're looking to achieve buy-in from the community for that shared vision before we then embark on developing those engineering design drawings. So it's an iterative process and it's step-by-step to take those ideas and work on them before we actually roll them out into any kind of a design or implementation. Project phases. So roughly here, we've split this into 5 phases. We had the project initiation in fall of 2023, where we had met with stakeholders, members of council, and then we'd gotten some early community engagement. We had some technical assessment and visioning exercises around that time. So we had workshops. So Lori had also kind of taken, how many did you do? 2? Yeah, so we had a couple of workshops where we kind of walked the area and took a look at what was out there, what are the areas of concern, what are areas of opportunity, and worked on that through the end of the year. We were then able to take that information away and start working on some concept development and validation. And where we are now is we're roughly between that third step of concept development and validation and development of the report and closing the engagement loop. What we've definitely heard is a lot of feedback from the community, from business owners, just a lot of kind of questions or things that they want us to have a look at. So we are sort of between third and fourth steps here. We're not yet developing the report. We're not closing the engagement loop because there is this desire to have additional communication and engagement. Once that is done, once we do find that shared vision, then we're looking at moving on to early phase civil engineering design. So looking at some of those early phases of project that we could actually get done, working with existing capital plans. So if there's roads that are in poor condition, can those be where we start? And what would it look like to start rolling out some of these connections or improvements to the road networks and pedestrian cycling networks? So we had mentioned briefly community feedback. We had done a phase 1 where we did a number of different ways of engaging with the community. So newsletters, utility inserts, surveys, workshops with businesses, a lot of web views, 10,000. So what's the population of Armstrong right now? So maybe some repeat visitors. 73 participants in the survey online, 56 inputs to the community map, 36 participants in the business workshop that we had at the coffee shop on Pleasant Valley. And phase 2, open house and written feedback with 130 attendees, 45 comment cards, 331 post-its, 113 written submissions. And myself and the counselors were also present to take feedback in person from members of the community at that session. Yeah. So some of the key themes through phase 1. So phase 1 was really a lot about what people were looking for. So this is before we'd assembled the overall concept plan that members of the public could see. So at that early visioning stage, we were looking at things like improved traffic flow, bike lanes and pedestrian routes, youth and family friendly spaces, more seating and gathering, wayfinding signage, cosmetic and functional repairs, enhanced planting, and local art. So these were some of those, the big picture ideas when we were looking at that visioning of what the downtown could look like. And then in phase 2 was when we were looking at the actual first cut of the concept plans that are being shown to the public. Some of the major concerns raised were concerns about loss of parking. So there being a desire to see no net loss of parking or effectively keep parking the same. There were concerns about whether we were accommodating the rail trail at the price of the community or if the community impacts were sustainable. Business impacts. Again, members of the business community had voiced concerns that either changes to the parking or loss of parking could affect them. Accessibility impacts. So whether this would still provide the same opportunities for members of the community who are primarily using their vehicle to get around or to get to businesses, if that could impact them in a way that would be challenging for them to get out and do their errands and do their chores. And then also another one was a desire to keep the turn lane on Smith Drive. So we heard some feedback that there were previously had been removed, put back, and some different opinions or feedback on how that had gone at the time. Is it going to sleep, the mouse? Yeah, so the drawings that we'd reviewed, the concept drawings that we had reviewed at those sessions with the engagement were concept drawings. I think that's important to reiterate that those are conceptual only. These are not design drawings. These are not going to tender. They were developed in coordination with the Community Partner Group, which is the Chamber of Commerce, Communities in Bloom, and Community Futures, as well as City of Armstrong staff, and reflected the goals and feedback that we received in the phase 1 engagement. Community feedback has been incorporated in the concepts and phasing. Of course, there's always a balancing act when we're trying to do that. Some of the feedback that we get may conflict with other feedback, so we're trying to find that balance. And then the final note here, just again, all drawings are conceptual only. The detailed design process and later construction won't move forward until approved by council. Detailed design has a lot of components to it. There's a lot of studies that go along with that, whether those are traffic studies, whether it's just business impact studies that might be pursued with City of Armstrong as this is rolled out in a phased approach. All right, so geez, yeah, I think I'm just about done talking. So I think we'll get into the council discussion portion, and the way we were kind of envisioning this is that we could bring up a set of the concept drawings and we could kind of walk through phase by phase, or kind of have a look at the sheets and see if there's any main points that we want to touch on for those drawings. And of course, if there's any other questions, I mean, if we skip the page, feel free to bring those up. We can circle back around to those. Or if there's just larger overall questions about how we're working with those terms of reference, whether it's the active transportation plan, whether it's the traffic safety plan, any of those other items, yeah, let's have a discussion on it. So I guess I'll lead us off here with, I guess just to start the discussion here, the phasing plan. We've broken it up into a number of different street segments. So generally, if you look at the drawing, there's Smith South, Smith North, the section of Pleasant Valley between Smith and Mill. There's the Pleasant Valley couplet. There's the portion between Pleasant Valley to City Hall. And then we've got a little chunk down at Patterson there. So I guess any questions or feedback about how we've broken it up here, or just the phasing overall? Like, we've got kind of a phasing plan there that goes out to 2040 plus. So this is kind of a longer duration task. It's not an all at once kind of thing, and it will be with triggers at certain portions of it, whether those are development, whether those are provision of appropriate parking. So any questions or comments on this sheet?
That phase one area from, from liquor store corner to the Shepherd's Five Way to Okanagan Street. So I can't remember names sometimes. Do we envision that work all being completed as one project, or would that be a phased for that component itself? That might be a better question for Brad.
Yeah, that would depend on the overall cost for that section. It may have to be broken into two sections, being the PV North section and then the liquor store to the Mill Street intersection. As we get closer to detailed design, we'll work with McElhaney to work on the magnitude of cost for that to see what's feasible, but it would likely be two sections.
Just a comment, I guess. I'm just super excited about getting the roller coaster ride done first, and I hope that's phase A of phase one. And I think it's an expectation that from the community that that's a huge priority. So I don't suppose there'll be any feedback from that road construction. So just one other thing, that phase from Shepherd's Corner down to the diner, as it is planned now, will only lose one parking spot. Is that correct? I think that's really important to make sure that everybody hears that. And, I just have a feeling when people will see how that street can look, where you've got the potentially wider sidewalks and gathering spaces and so on and so forth, that it could be a light bulb moment for some. I know that people are mostly concerned about, I don't know that mostly concerned, I think we're mostly hearing about the parking. And I'm not sure that everybody is aware that the sidewalks will be wider and the landscaping, what doesn't look good won't be there, and what isn't there that will be better, and that there won't be obstructions in front of the Spirit Square, and that crosswalk will be raised and more obvious, and that there will be a truck route, no trucks allowed on there. Like, there's so many components to that one piece that's more than just losing one parking spot, that I really hope that the community will gather around that first step at least and let us get going on it. I think it's really positive. And like I say, when I was at that open house, most of the people were concerned with parking. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that most people knew all the parts that were in that phase. So.
Can we go back to that, just that slide you had up in a second, just phase one, please? Okay, but if you can go to phase one, that would be great. Yeah. My concern is still the parking. Sorry, Cheryl, but if it's parallel on both sides with one lane, I can envision a week and a half to get from one end of the block to the other end of the block if people are parallel parking from both sides. Whereas if we kept the angle parking and didn't lose the parking on that side, I don't understand how that's any better than what we have now. I understand that the angle parking isn't ideal, but I don't think that's ideal. Parallel parking, all I hear from the people that I talk to is they don't want a parallel park. You can't have old people parallel park. I know it's ageism, but these are old people telling me this. So one lane with parallel parking on both sides, it's just, to me, just slows everything down, but that's.
So if I could, so maybe now is the time to give us your rationale as to why we're changing from angle to parallel and basically sell us on that recommendation. And then that gives us an idea to kind of understand both sides a little bit. So I'd like to understand from you, from the professionals at least, why this is being recommended over the angle parking. I hear safety. I'm not quite sold on the safety issue right now, especially I think that the traffic is slower and there is, restrictions on commercial use, or commercial traffic on there. So sell me on that and at least explain to me why that is the better feature.
Yeah, so we've got a few reasons for why it's like that, for why it's the parallel parking configuration. So foremost is safety, like that is the number one. So that comes through from both the Watt Consulting report that's talking about eliminating that angle parking, converting that to parallel parking. There are also separate studies. Again, they're not that hyper local, like they're not done at the, it's not a study done in Armstrong, it's not a study done in the Okanagan, but it's aggregate studies that show a reduced risk if they're converted from angle parking stalls to parallel parking stalls. So being conservative, it's something like a 30 to 40% improvement. Some studies say it's higher, some studies say it's a bit lower, but let's choose that point as sort of an average. And the Watt Consulting report had specifically called out just the issues with reversing out of the stalls that could make that a challenge. Now, one of the benefits of converting to parallel parking is that it's narrower. So within the street right of way, we don't have a lot of space, so it's a bit narrower. We don't have to have cars nosing in. The trucks don't have their tail end hanging out into the street. And that is more important if we're going down to a single lane configuration. I definitely hear the concerns about parallel parking, people having to stop and reverse in. But likewise, if we see it at a single lane to get this public space improvement that we're looking for, vehicles will then be reversing out into a single lane traffic. It's not like the current setup where there's a second lane where you can kind of just stick to the train track side. If you're driving through there, if you don't want people reversing into you, it is a tighter use of space.
But if I may, if you have the angle parking, you've only got one person coming out of you. You don't have them from both sides coming out of you,
Oh, yeah.
right? Which would be an issue. And you park an F-350 parallel park, it's still sticking out into that tinier lane, right? It's that truck's still sticking out, whether it's the ass end of it sticking out or the side sticking out. Something's going to be out in the lane.
Yeah, so it comes to looking for that balance again. So we're trying to find that balance between what can we get for land use that gives us the opportunity to provide these landscape areas, to provide the additional streetscape. So where can we get the benches? Where can we get the opportunities to get cafe tables out and get that street use? And we get it by kind of compressing down that parking and trying to find a more efficient way to stack up those cars in that corridor. Now, saying that, there's other opportunities here. I think maybe Christine could even speak to it a bit more clearly than I can, just about the benefits of having parallel parking in front of businesses and not creating such a visual barrier. So Christine, is there something?
Yeah, sure. So if one of the goals of the project is to make the downtown more accessible, both visually and physically as well, what we don't want is a whole lineup, like 6 meters deep of car between, say, the facade of the Home Hardware and the cars passing by. If we reduce it to parallel parking, people can see what's going on a bit better. So that's one of the things that is ameliorated with parallel parking. And so you don't end up with this sort of rampart of cars separating the people driving by and wondering where they're going to stop, that kind of thing. So that's a good thing. Another part of it that we did want to touch on is that, this is a little bit back to the road engineering part of it, is that we're trying to align that thoroughfare with the adjacent lane past Okanagan. So we kind of need to move the lane up, and there isn't room to do that if we have angled parking on that north side there. So that's one of the more technical problems we were trying to solve at the same time. And then, to your point about the parking on the south side, we're trying not to lose parking. So I know, yeah, I lived in Australia. It's really tough parallel parking on the left-hand side. It's tricky. It's a challenging thing. In terms of the safety component as well, the studies also support angled parking on not terribly busy streets. So this is a main thoroughfare and it's a riskier place to put angled parking. You know, down along Bridge Street, that's different. But this is a main thoroughfare and it's not an ideal spot for angled parking, so. But again, like we're trying to balance a whole bunch of little things here.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, when I'm looking at this space, I look at the opportunities of how it can be used when we have our markets and our outdoor events and how that space can be really well used. I have to be honest, when I first saw the parking on the right-hand side of the road, I was quite concerned and I got quite the earful from a few residents as well. I went to Salmon Arm where they have a similar setup. I went to Kamloops where I saw a similar setup, and I still saw some challenges around that. And but hearing how the space could be better used with the sidewalks does alleviate some of that concerns. I also remember from the traffic safety study that there was a recommendation to remove some of the parking spots as well. Am I correct that this would actually improve that? We'd have more spaces than if we had implemented that study? Is that?
I think it's about neutral from what the study recommendations were, because they were looking at maybe some of the angle stalls staying, but then having to move them further away from the intersection. Because if a car needs to reverse out, then they need more space from the intersection.
Yeah, I think the change
Is
is
it-
like 1 or 2 stall difference either way.
Okay, because I remember seeing from the study they recommended removing a few, so it's either the same or it's quite close. Okay, so there's virtually no change. So like I said, I like to use the space. I am challenged when I see think of the idea of pedestrians, and I was watching some of the pedestrians getting out from the right-hand side because they're getting into that single lane traffic to get around their vehicle, to get onto the sidewalk is a bit of a challenge for me. And then potentially I do see the sidewalks, but potential of pedestrians, you know, crossing the street as well. So I do see the street slowing down significantly. Whether or not how that's going to play out, it's hard to say for sure. So.
And that is a discussion in the traffic safety study as well too, is what are the ideal speed limits for when you have that kind of a narrower street where you're going to have more cars, more pedestrians, more cyclists. So it does talk about on some of those streets, potentially reducing them from 50 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour. And that could be something that's looked at for making it easier for people to actually come in and park if you don't have 50 kilometer an hour or let's call it 60 coming up that road behind you.
Thank you very much. You guys keep using the words net parking, that there's a net loss of not very much parking, and I understand overall for the downtown with the whole project and that kind of thing, but very specifically to PV North for me, and looking at this with the parking on both sides of the street, for me, I'm scared that we are narrowing our roads too much. I was recently in Vancouver where there's cars on both sides of the street. It's like a two-way street, but you have to pull over into a parking stall to let people go by. And I don't like that style of living. That's not really me. And this is just my personal take on it. And I feel like parallel parking on both sides of the road, not everybody always hits the mark. I see not everybody getting as close to the side of the road as possible. Our roads narrowing, and I just don't like it very much. And I know that you are telling me that the angled parking is less safe than this parallel parking, and I've been hearing the residents consistently that the angle parking doesn't seem to be that big of a deal, and that this seems to be, the change of this is a little scary. And just one more thing on this, because I remember Lori bringing up other communities having similar feedback and then doing the project and then it resulting in other things. And for me personally, I I don't like going to cramped downtowns and I like driving around and that kind of stuff. It actually, for me personally, it's a huge deterrent. For me personally, I like my little Armstrong and I like how it is. And I'm sorry that I'm the person who's like, I don't like change, but, this is how I feel and this scares me a little bit.
A couple of other things that we've talked about is accessibility. So I'm wondering if where we think we may have handicap parking, if those sections would be bigger, wider. Also, we've talked about some of the places that we could have short-term parking, like 15-minute, half hour, whatever time limits. So if we had those two things implemented in whatever plan we end up going with, it would be a little bit easier for seniors to be able to get a parking spot in front of the bank or in front of the coffee shop, that kind of thing. But if they're handicap spots, traditionally they are wider, bigger. Would they kind of cut into the sidewalk a little bit in some places? And then the third question is the one lane wider than a standard road, a lane that we see today? With the parking, parallel parking on both sides, is the lane in the middle any wider than normal?
Yeah, so 2 points there. So for handicap accessible parking, just depending on where those go, yeah, we can take a look at whether they're longer or whether they actually go a bit into the boulevard so we can accommodate those better. But we would need to kind of have a discussion with the community about where it would make sense to have those, how many of those we want to set aside. Likewise for shorter term parking. So if there's certain businesses that could benefit from having like a really short, like a 15-minute pickup drop off, if there's, let's say, pickup orders for food or something like that is fairly common. So, there's definitely going to be a lot of opportunities to look at that for how those stalls can be used. And that's, again, not set in stone. So we can, as the community kind of uses the space, you could always look at it and say, okay, we need to designate more stalls for this, or we need to, change these ones so that it's not such long term. You're finding that people are leaving their cars there to go somewhere else for long periods of time. The lane itself, is it wider? Yeah, it's wider than other cities. So this is not a Vancouver lane that we're proposing here. This is a 4.25 meter wide lane. That is a City of Armstrong standard. So that comes out of the City of Armstrong spec to have that 4.25. Other cities, you're going to see them at 3.3 meters. So this is about a meter wider than a standard lane in other cities. So it is going to kind of allow for, if you're thinking a truck with its mirrors out the side on both sides, I know what you're talking about. I get it. But it is a bit wider. Now for Armstrong, that's partly because maybe that's because you have larger vehicles coming through. Partly it's also for snow clearing. So even that 3.3 meter wide, that might work for Vancouver, but where you're going to be plowing snow to the shoulder, we like to have a little bit of extra buffer. So that's part of why we see that almost like a full meter wider than in other cities.
Just as a follow-up, so I'm old too. I'm in my 70s and I go to Salmon Arm. Armstrong actually is, where's another little community that we have, or a bigger community in our area where we actually still have angle parking? I know that doesn't mean we have to change it, but it's the way that communities have gone when they've done their downtown revite. Enderby did the same thing. Salmon Arm has the parking on both sides with one lane. I know it's change. I don't know that, we have one benefit here, and that's that we only have on this, we're only talking about this one phase at this moment, but we only have businesses on one side of the street. In Salmon Arm, you've got businesses on both sides. And so I don't know that we have the same kind of number of vehicles that are coming and going all the time. But the parallel parking part, I have kids downtown Yaletown and the same thing, and I don't parallel park in front of their place, but there's parking spots available elsewhere. And in this particular one, we have the little Armstrong parking lot down by the co-op, we have the use of the bank parking lot when it's not bank hours, so that's not terribly helpful. But for long-term planning, we can keep an eye on another opportunity for a parking lot there too. We don't have that right now, but if that's a really big issue and it has the potential of being a really big issue, that's one way to mitigate the parking problem, is to keep our eyes open for future parking lot that we can purchase. Anyway, I'm not 100% sold on this either. I'm just so anxious to get that gall darn road done. I just want, if there was no parking, we got the road done, I'd be partly happy. So I don't know, I just like to be able to come to some kind of an agreement that, you know, we don't want to, people don't want to lose the parking, but how do you have no lots of parking if you don't have parallel parking on both sides? Cut down parallel parking on one side, but then you're losing, what, 20 parking spots, and we're back to that concern. Somewhere in the middle, there's got to be an answer.
I think you just don't have parallel parking. I think you stay with the angle parking on the one side of the road. You brought up the accessibility, Councillor Feller. It's, my concern would also be when you're parked on the south side of the north side of the street there, and you're trying to get out of your car and the curb is a bit high, and you're opening your door into the curb, and for old folks like us that have bad legs and backs, they're trying to get out, at least with the angle, your door's open, you can just step out of your vehicle. You're not stumbling over the curb. I think we're just inviting trouble with these, but again, we'll talk it out.
Can I ask, so if there was the parallel parking on the south side of the PV North section was removed and angle parking was returned to that area, what is the net difference based on keeping the wider sidewalk, the existing you know, curb enhancements in terms of the you know, the vegetative work and whatever else? What is the calculation of the number of angle parking stalls that is available without the angle parking only, without parking on the south side of PV North?
I don't think we've done a count on that scenario. That scenario was not something that we really looked at previously, so I think that would be perhaps a takeaway. Any comments on that one, Lori?
Just that would create a bit more shifting of the road.
Yeah, I mean,
Alignments,
yeah,
which was
logistics.
one thing we tried to avoid a little bit.
So logistically here, yeah, I guess that's the way to look at it, is not just process wise to do that, but when we look at this, we're aligning that intersection across the intersection at Okanagan. So that helps with that, to bring that down and just sort of not having kind of like a wiggle in the road there, because we're trying to create this space around Spirit Square where you can kind of get out front and access it. Right now, the ramp from Spirit Square basically drops you down onto a really narrow chunk of sidewalk right next to a travel lane. So we are trying to create that additional buffer outside of Spirit Square so that it's not such a abrupt transition into the roadway there, and bringing that crosswalk back across. So if, you know, if that's something we can take a look at, there would still potentially be some loss for safety improvements in front of Shepherd's, where we're trying to pull those stalls away from the intersection so that people aren't reversing into a single lane right at the intersection. And then also just some of the improvements for safety at the driveway letdowns here. So we're bringing those driveway letdowns out up to the edge of the travel lane. So we're still going to have sort of those little radius bulges where it transitions back into parking. Those would still be present in the alternate configuration, because we're trying to really shorten up how long those crosswalks are. So right now you have to go curb to curb, far side to far side, and we're trying to bring out the edges of the crosswalks such a shorter distance for people to travel across the roadway exposed.
I'm not sure, Councillor Nitchie, were you thinking of, was your question referring to keeping the parallel parking on the north side and then just doing the angle parking on the south? I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you
Yeah,
meant.
I'm trying to get an option B, which is basically removal of the parallel parking on PV North altogether. And just angle parking on the north side only, so the business side, as it is right now. And I totally understand what they're saying though, is that, yeah, the road will have to shift to the south a little bit to get your width. Yeah, so I'm just looking, I'm curious as to what that calculation is in terms of what the number of stalls is net loss for that option.
If, I'm not, I might be mistaken, but if we're wanting to shift it, it's just a simple bend in the road at some point at the far end then, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, so if it was to keep angle parking on the north side of the road travel lane itself would be further to the south, and
Yeah.
that would have to kind of come back around Spirit Square if we want to meet that intent of having more public space.
I also wanted to comment, that we've heard a lot about seniors in our community, which we have many of, but we also have very many young families. And with parallel parking on both sides of the street and car seats being affixed on the passenger side of the vehicles, that means parents are unloading kids into an active roadway versus to a sidewalk. And I struggle with that quite a bit. Predominantly they are because you can see them in your rearview mirror. So most youngsters are placed in the passenger side of the vehicle. And then we're offloading. We have a parent or small children getting out of vehicles into traffic. And to me, that risk is probably way too much for me to support this.
Sorry. Light came on before I got my call. Has there been any successful discussion with the narrowing of the railway right of way? I mean, that would just solve all our problems, wouldn't it?
So, I would say we haven't reached a place where we've had, successful discussions on that for sure. They've given us a sense of, what their acceptable kind of standards are, but, they've asked us to provide them with a detailed package, basically of the whole rail corridor through downtown before they'll comment on what they'll accept and what they won't accept.
The brick wall features on either side on PV North and South, is that the actual official line? Or if we were to give up that position, would we possibly lose more ground? I don't know if Mr. Ackerman can comment on that.
The rail corridor does vary in width through town, but generally that brick wall is largely the border of it. There's a few places that it deviates, but the rail line has also expressed interest in the past of trying to increase their footprint of that as well. So we're both on opposite ends of the spectrum, fighting over limited real estate is really what it comes down to.
Would increased security such as the proposed fencing and things that we have, would that have any possibility of them looking at us more favorably?
It's part of the discussion. Their fencing requirements that close to the active train line are quite stringent, and I'm not sure it's a look that we would want to have for our downtown. It's somewhat reminiscent of maybe Shawshank. So it does change the look of the downtown with that level of fencing.
Go ahead, Councillor Belster.
Thank you very much. Along the idea of what Councillor Ritchie was saying there about what it would look like with the increased path space and the angled parking on the north side of PD North there, over by Country Manor and Old Ranch Liquor Store, the path to Spirit Square, that was something that the public was actively asking for, or that was something that just elaborate on on how that path came to be.
Do you want me to tackle that one? That, Counselor Balser, that was more about just getting people to Spirit Square without them having to cross the street, go down and cross back over the way you do right now. So that was more of a functional addition. And once we had added the parallel, we were gonna remove it to put the parallel parking in, but we were able to accommodate it as well as the parallel parking. So we left it in, but right now, the way you do it is you have to cross the street, go down, cross again. This just adds a little more functionality by being able to walk just down that side.
So one of the takeaway exercises that you guys were saying was potentially seeing what it would look like to have the angled parking in there. Would we be able to do that for that side of PV North as well? In front of the CIBC area, or like basically, if you're looking at the picture left of Spirit Square?
That's a challenging one if we're trying to reconcile that intersection. So if we don't want to have that really far offset across the intersection, usually want to bring traffic straight across. This alignment does that. If we try and keep those angle stalls there, we'd have to push that travel lane down, or there would just be a loss of that public space that we're trying to create. So that kind of green buffer there, which could be landscaping, it could be street furnishings, benches, anything like that. That would likely be lost because you need close to 6 meters to get that.
One more follow-up there. What's the width on that path? I see that it appears to be smaller than the 4-meter wide multi-use path.
Yeah, I believe that's 3 meters on the north side, on the Pleasant Valley Boulevard North. It's not as much of a corridor or a thoroughfare. That's just sort of like a little branch that we tried to provide. They'll be able to bring people into that Spirit Square area. And it also does kind of reflect what's out there now. That brick area right now is a lot wider. So it is kind of maintaining some of that same character where you have a broader kind of corridor in that spot.
So just in a little bit of a summary here, when we started this process, we had our downtown walkabouts, and the people who came out to those walkabouts were talking about how they wanted the wider sidewalks, the benches and the landscaping, the gathering spaces. And I think that is what formed some of the ideas for what we have right now. The people who weren't in the public consultation at that point are the ones who are concerned, I think mostly, with the lack of parking or with the parallel parking. So I don't know what the alternative is, except that if we're going to stick with the less safe angle parking, then we're not going to be able to have the wider sidewalks and gathering spaces. We're not going to be slowing down the traffic, which was another main intent. It was more about this not being a parking lot and a thoroughfare. It was about being an active and vibrant gathering space in our downtown. And it looks like we're at two separate things. The people who are the most vocal about the proposal are the ones who are concerned about having their cars with them. And the ones who are the ones who originally came out and were interested in had a different vision for their downtown are the ones who are the silent majority, the ones who are on bikes or do a lot of walking, who want to sit on the bench and meet their neighbors and stuff. So we're really at two spots in my mind. So if we want to leave it closer to the way it is right now, what have we accomplished as long as we get that road paved? But we're not thinking into the future. We're not thinking about a long-term plan. We're not thinking about having those spaces where people just enjoy going downtown. So I think we're at a bit of an impasse, and I get the feeling that people around the table would rather we don't have any change, as long as we keep our angle parking in our parking lot and maybe get that paving done. So I guess that's where we're at in my summary.
Thank you. Great points from everyone at the table. I've been doing a lot of listening, and I agree with lots of the points. I don't think that these two things are mutually exclusive of each other. I don't think that that by keeping the angle parking, that we're actually giving up the stuff that we kind of envisioned in those early exercises. I think you guys have done a fantastic job on coming up with the designs and being creative, but I think through one of the premises of using parallel parking, I think if you had the direction to go back and maintain that angle parking, I think that we would see a different design that you guys came up with that still met a lot of the needs, maybe not all of them, but I think that we would see lots of those benefits there and give up things in different places. I think there's room for both, and I agree with Councillor Nitchie that I think we can get our angle parking there and then just kind of realign stuff and kind of go back to the design piece a little bit on how wide can we keep things, and do you give stuff up on the south side of PV Boulevard instead and kind of concentrate more of it onto the north side other than that Spirit Square. That's kind of where I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, I think I'm all along the same line. I don't want to make a decision until I've kind of seen option B. If I could see option B and tell me what we lose or gain or whatever is happening there, then I can, you know, compare the two of them and make a little bit more informed decision. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow councilors. I think there is an option B. I think we can have it all. I really think we can please the people and have what we need there without losing a ton of parking. It can be done. We can still slow the traffic down. You don't have to make people pound through at 50. You can raise, you know, I'm all for, you know, traffic slowing methods as well, as long as we keep them back, you know, keep people happy. And fix that road. That's the biggest concern since we sat down at this table 2 years ago, is to get that road fixed. I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't care if you don't do anything, just fix the road. But there you go.
I was just gonna say that we can't create much more space. We have parameters in which we have to work, and we're not getting a volleyball court downtown because it's not gonna fit. So what we have to do is make it safe, make it comfortable for people, and get the best use out of the limited space that we have. And I think another trip to the drawing board might present us with some more acceptable options.
So it's almost like we were a bit premature in bringing a big change to the downtown. And if we had a plan a few years ago and we're providing some off-street parking, it probably would have solved all the problems. Because when I think about Enderby, for example, they have very limited parking on the street, but you just have to go through, like where we have the downtown bakery. You go through a little passway and there's a big parking lot there. And, you know, on our side, I don't know exactly where a house might come up for sale. It's going to add a lot more to the cost, but with that in mind, you know, when we're sitting around the table planning now, we should be thinking ahead of new development. And, you know, that the parking is going to be a consideration. People are going to drive to town. I heard loud and clear that Spanish people are not going to be riding their bikes. Some will, but most won't. I understand that. But if we had, with forethought, had another parking lot down there, I think we would have solved that problem. Problem is, we don't have that. So here we are. But we can be thinking about that if it's something else comes on sale somewhere, up for sale.
I don't want to seem to be piling on, but the parking study, there was none done on Saturday and Sunday, which are the two busiest days of the week down there, as far as I could see. They were done through the week, the Monday through Friday. Was the 5 days the parking study was done?
It wasn't a parking study. We just had bylaw.
Parking count.
Parking count, and it's only on the days that we have bylaw.
Okay, well, as far as I'm concerned, the two busiest days are Saturday and Sunday. So I think there was, those numbers were missed. So it was just a count at that point. It wasn't a.
It's not a parking. One of the recommendation is that we do a proper parking.
Sure.
study,
Well,
right?
okay. But then it's just a bunch of numbers at that point, for me.
So we've talked ad nauseum about parking, but this plan is more than just about parking. This is about creating some an opportunity for some vibrancy in the downtown. So I would like to see a little bit more of a visual representation of what the changes look like. And I know you have your little CAD design software and 3D design software, you guys can come up with something that kind of shows the benefits of option A and B and gives us a streetscape view perhaps of what this is going to look like. It's hard to conceptualize from here what it looks like with wider sidewalks and with some boulevard improvements and with some bump outs and how that, kind of affects what the downtown core looks like. And I think it's helpful for us as counselors to make the decision and also for the community to see what it could look like, what the potential is, and what the rationale for that is, right? So the bump outs and the wider sidewalks are all to create and try to enhance a business culture down, an environment downtown that is going to create an opportunity for people to move their businesses out onto the sidewalks, right? So the coffee shops can have people sitting on the street, and so that we can, kind of create an opportunity for people to be downtown and enjoy the, sort of that European style of not just cars and traffic like we've been doing for the last 70 years in this North America, but maybe thinking a little bit about how we integrate pedestrian and cycling and cars and how we do that all together and create a business opportunity for people. So I just like, I know we just talked so much about the parking side, but I'd really like to know about what's the lighting scheme going to look like? What's the wayfinding signage going to look like? What's sort of the bike racks going to look like, and what that kind of stuff. So let's just make sure we sell that part of it too, and kind of and talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Nietzsche. We had been wanting to make sure that we kind of settled on what the framework was before we moved into that more visual. And that was my recommendation, is that our next step was to move into those visuals for the early phases. So definitely that's always been on our program.
Thank you. I think that council wants to have it all. And I think that that's appropriate, and why shouldn't we? And I think that we're close. And I think McElhaney's done a really good job, and Lori, of creating this downtown vibrant center that the community did request, and that is in our council priorities. Connectivity and creating community is hard when it means change. I would like to hear a resolution come forward from council with respect to looking at a design that perhaps included the angled parking. We will lose parking. It will be less than what we have now. But what would that look like to keep the angled parking, to keep the public happy? And what does that look like in a cross section, so that we can envision everything? So if we kind of move more into a bit of a design phase, if council's agreeing to that, looking at the angled parking, if they're not going to agree to the parallel parking, I think a decision could be made tonight. And we could carry on with some type of a design drawing for the next concepts. I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think, and I don't know if it fits with the resolution you're suggesting, I'd like to compare the two plans together, like take a look at this one and then also one that includes as much angle parking, but still maintaining, like, I don't want to lose all of that space. I know that there'll be some give at some point, right? But to be able to look at them side by side, I think is important.
If you're looking for a resolution, then perhaps the resolution is just to direct staff to come back with a second option for council comparison. That includes angle parking with as much of the existing sidewalk width and other enhancements that are included in this plan.
Could I just ask a question for clarity? Because really in all other sections in the Pleasant Valley North, we have provided that option. So would that resolution be specifically for the Pleasant Valley North segment? Or are you looking at us doing that in other locations as well?
If I could speak to that, my feeling right now is that I look at this area as sort of the pilot or test section for the whole Kerry project. So I would like us to kind of focus on this for now and look at how it works, if it goes, whatever we decide on, and see how it works and doesn't work or whatever else, and then use that as our template moving forward. That's my opinion.
So I will, good with the motion that you presented. We'll have staff take this back, give us Plan A and Plan B for Pleasant Valley Boulevard North Phase 1 only at this point in time. Present us with two options, one with parallel parking and one with angled parking, and let us know what our net gains and losses are, currently what we have. That motion from Councillor Nietzsche, seconded by Councillor Todd. Any further questions? Councillor Ballstar.
Thank you very much. With the option B of angle parking, especially for this test area, I know that it was said for kind of Spirit Square right. It would be nice if we could carry that jog that we did down to add the parallel parking left of Spirit Square there. We could continue that jog and keep parallel parking in front of the CIBC Country Manor area. That there's a lot of very active businesses on that corner though. Angle parking, that's what I meant to say. Thank you so much. Huge shift, but anyways, but yeah, for an option B for the whole space, please.
So back in the olden days, when the landscaping was done 88, 89 downtown, and we went to the 2 lanes of traffic going the same direction in the loop, there was, and I remember this because I thought it sounded weird. There's 2 lanes of traffic. One lane was for the travel. The other lane was for the backing up of the angle parking. Nobody uses it that way. I don't think it's a bad idea, but nobody uses it that way. Maybe nobody understands that's what it was originally for, and it's not marked. The painting isn't marked that way. But there's elimination of some of the risk. If that one lane is for going into your angle parking and backing out into your angle parking. My question is, you're probably wondering if I had a question or if I'm just blabbing. Will with angle parking and no parallel parking, would we have still 1 lane or would we have 2 lanes of traffic? One for backing out and going in and one for flying through?
I think if the intent is to provide those additional spaces on the north side of the road for businesses, for pedestrians, the wider sidewalk, that we wouldn't have 2 lanes. I think if we have angled parking, we'd likely end up with an even wider single lane just to give some more shy distance from
Makes
the
sense.
backs. But yeah, we wouldn't have a sidewalk on the south side in that configuration. So that would go away and it would sort of be, I don't want to say a lane and a half, but it would be probably a bit oversized to give a bit more clearance in that scenario.
That's an advantage.
And actually, something that I had forgot to question, what about deliveries on the big trucks on PV North that need that access to those businesses? Some we can have a truck route around that, but if you're doing a delivery to one of those stores, where are we going to be able to have them stop safely?
Sorry, would you be able to use that across from the liquor store where it's kicked out now? Would you be able to put a spot there for a truck pull in?
I would request maybe that we save these questions till we bring till we have the opportunity to explore the options. So we're not guessing.
Any further questions? We'll call the vote then. All those in favor of the amendment? And that will be carried unanimously. Thank you very much for your time.
I'm sorry, my light's still on, so I feel I should be talking. I'd really hope that you don't see this as a negative. This is sort of like a workshop, and I think with all the feedback that we've had from the community, it was kind of should have happened a little sooner, but we've all had an opportunity to try and sort out another way and have an option and make as many people happy as possible. We'll never make everybody happy, but I think this was a a good opportunity to talk it through and get everybody's thoughts. And so please don't feel that we've pounded on you, and just hope that we can move forward with something kind of exciting too.
Very good. Yeah, why don't we take a 6-minute recess and adjourn at 5:10? All right, welcome. Welcome back, everybody, and we'll move on with new business. 3.2, a zoning bylaw review. Lori's going to take us through some new information, and there will be a couple of motions after this presentation. Ms. Cordell.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm not gonna, I haven't prepared a formal presentation, but I'm just gonna kind of walk you through what I've figured out. So after the committee of the whole meeting on Monday, I was sitting down yesterday calculating how many lots are over 4,000 square feet. 8 was the answer to that question. And then just started doing some calculations on what the density would look like on some of the lots that already have strata townhouse developments at the sliding scale density that council directed, and realized that that sliding scale density isn't enough to permit those strata developments to rebuild should a fire happen to the same number of units. So it would cause a legal non-conforming situation. But if your building burns more than 75%, it doesn't matter if you're legally non-conforming, you're treated under the new rules. So they wouldn't be allowed, so say they were only allowed 10 units under the new sliding scale zoning, and previously they had 15, they'd only be allowed to build back 10. So 5 families would not have their house anymore. So I quickly realized that as a challenge. And so I've recommended, was thinking about it, and I'm recommending an alternate path forward that I think will address some of the concerns that you have brought up over the last while about the sliding scale and its potential impact on density. So my proposal before you today, if I can get the mouse to wake up. Yeah, and so I can show you on that map, not all of them would be non-conforming, but they were all the strata ones. So my recommendation is that instead of having simplifying it so much that we have basically, one medium density zone and one apartment zone, as well as the agricultural and the country residential, that instead we would have a residential 1 zone that would allow a maximum of 4 units. So it's gonna drive me crazy. I don't know, it just needs to wake up, it falls asleep. So it would have, this is similar to what you saw before. So this is the way our lawyer has said it needs to work. Parcels under 280 square meters can have up to 3 units. Parcels greater than 280 square meters could have 4 units. And then there's no sliding scale on the R1 zone. It would just be a maximum of 4 units anywhere that was zoned R1. And then we would create an additional, I'm just gonna use the keyboard, an additional zone called R2. And the R2 zone would integrate that sliding scale. So it would still have that same wording, 3 units below 280, 4 units above 280. And then I put 1 additional unit for every 150 meters above 420. So it's not the 300 you were looking at, because that creates those nonconformities, and it's not spread out across the whole city. It's only on the parcels that are currently zoned RM2 that were suited for townhouse development. So just so you can see this a little better, and I know this is small, I'll make it bigger. So this is our proposed zoning map. There's a few changes still because it's draft that we're working through, but anywhere that has the circles are the existing strata developments that would become this new R2 zone. So they would have that sliding scale. They would be areas of density. If they fully burn down, they might be able to build more dense than they are right now, but it's only, that zoning is only directed to those parcels rather than scattered across the whole community. All the yellow would be the R1. So those would only be allowed up to 4 units as outlined by the province. And then the square areas that's a little bit hard to see. This one's a square, over here's a square, are the places that currently have RM2 zoning, like those other townhouse stratas, but are actually apartments. So they would move to the residential apartment zone. So it would basically create those 3 levels of zone. We'd have the medium that allows up to 4. We'd have the medium high, which has that sliding scale, and then we'd have the apartment zone. So I think in my mind, it creates that balance that I heard you looking for when we were talking about it, but it also allows us to have higher density to the levels like we already have now, and maybe a little bit more, which is a nod to what the province is looking for anyways from us. But in controlled areas, not across. And then there are still some bigger parcels, but they would have to come before council to be rezoned to that R2, or they would subdivide into small parcels that could have 4 dwelling units apiece. So I feel like this option provides a bit of balance. It addresses what I was hearing as your concern, but also allows us to still have areas with more density. There's questions?
Just thank you for doing that. I think that adding the extra zone makes me feel a lot better, more so than kind of that arbitrary 300 number that I threw out there the other night. But yeah, I'm glad. And I like that it maintains integrity of current neighborhoods and then also allows for kind of that flexibility if needed in those areas that are already higher density. Thank you. I like it.
Thank you, Lori. I also think that suits our needs really good. And with that being said, I will throw out the motion that the Committee of the Whole rescind the following resolution. Committee of the Whole 624, that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that staff update the draft zoning bylaw to reflect the sliding scale density of an additional unit every 300 meters squared over the 410 meters squared. So we'll be voting to rescind this and we'll replace it with another. Can I have a mover? Council, lost it, Councillor Weiner. Too long. Councillor Drapple is a seconder. Is there any question on that? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And that the Committee of the Whole recommends that the Council direct staff to update the draft zoning bylaw number 1924 or 2024, sorry, to include a residential 1R1 zone that allows a maximum density of 4 units and a residential 2R2 zone that allows a sliding scale density of 4 units for the first 420 meters squared, plus an additional unit every 150 meters squared. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Drapula, seconder, Councillor Todd. Was there any question on that? All those in favor? And that will carry unanimously. Thank you very much for your work, Lori. That's awesome. And at this time, I'd like to have a motion for adjournment. Councillor Drapula, seconder, Councillor Weiner. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.